Ledger is a writing podcast and hopefully a little bit of your daily motion as far as writing goes. I'm your host, Austin Wilson. Welcome to today's show where I chat with Brock Swinson, also a podcast host and writer. He and I have a lot of stuff in common that we end up chatting about, but he came by to talk about his book, Ink by the Barrel, Secrets from Prolific Writers. You can check that out at brockswinson.com/ink. He also hosts Creative Principles, a podcast with over 430 episodes. A lot of people on that show that are very interesting and talented writers. People like Robert Eggers, Dennis Lehane, Eleanor Coppola, Tanana Reeve-Dew, Judd Apatow, Edgar Wright, Ethan Hawke, whom I adore. Hello, Ethan. Yeah, just a lot of stuff for us to cover. Brock is very, very busy and does a lot of things. The book is... he bills it as an easy and proven way to become prolific, which is one of the things that we talk about. What does prolific mean for him? What does it mean in today's society as far as writing goes? And we talk about the advice that's in his book. We even talk about marketing copywriting, because that's another thing that he and I have in common. We also talk about the big topic, it seems, here at Ledger, which is whether or not writing every day is necessary or something that he does. And as I sort of mentioned in the intro that you just heard, the daily motion that he talks about, so writing every day and whether that means getting words on the page for the day. We talk about all kinds of things, inspiration, how much research and writing it takes for him to do an episode of his show where he's talking to really, really busy people and people who have a lot of stuff that they've done that he wants to chat about. Interesting chat with Brock. Make sure you go to brockswinson.com/ink, where you can get a free copy of Ink by the Barrel. He's giving away, I think, 10,000. So make sure you go check it out and see if there's still any available. Check out Creative Principles and give it a listen. You'll hear something that hits you. I guarantee it, because there's a ton of people on the show. As always, go to Austin R. Wilson to check out my stuff, and I don't know really where I am on social media right now. My Twitter account's almost completely done because of all the stuff going on over there, but I have a link tree that lists a lot of other places you can find me, so check that out. Like the show, subscribe to the show, rate and review the show. I haven't said that a lot, but those things really do help other people find the show. I feel weird saying those things, but that's just part of the machine that we've all signed on for. So if you like the show, please do those things, and please tell other people about the show. In between recording this episode and posting it, I moved houses, which was very easy until it became time for me to have my internet hooked up, which then was the worst thing that could have happened to me, only because I work from home and need the internet. So I didn't have the internet for a week. Thanks Comcast and Xfinity. I canceled my account there and went somewhere else because they're so horrible. It's just so weird to have the internet be such a key part of my life and then have it disappear, and then I'm like bereft for a week. Anyway, here's my chat with Brock Swinson. Make sure you go check out his stuff and let me know what you think of the show. I am super interested in like 436 episodes, and specifically in your book, you talk about protecting your time and scheduling. And I'm really curious how that matches up with recording your show.
Yeah, I mean, to go way back, I mean, the show started with, I was living in LA at the time. I was working on commercials and TV shows, a lot of bad TV shows, a lot of murder reenactment type shows, stuff like that. But there's a job listing on Craigslist. So I've been doing some podcasts lately, and it's like, in hindsight, whenever I followed a weird curiosity, it like led to something pretty good, or at least some of the time it does. So I applied this job on Craigslist, and I ended up getting hired at Creative Screenwriting Magazine. It's a magazine I kind of grew up reading. It's more of a website now. But I go from being a PA and on these sets and things like that, to I'm like driving to go meet a screenwriter. And the first one I ever did was this guy, Blake Masters. He wrote a movie called Two Guns. So I'm like on the way to meet him. Every billboard is Denzel Washington and Mark Wahlberg, and this big movie coming out.
It's based on a comic.
Yeah, based on a comic, and he's written a bunch of stuff kind of since then. But at the time, I don't know, I feel like I learned more talking to him an hour than I did going to school to learn about screenwriting. And I've been doing that for 10 years. Somewhere in the middle of that, I kind of pitched the idea to the magazine, like, hey, we have all this great audio. What do you think about maybe me hosting a show and we'll do a podcast? And I feel like podcasts were still kind of like, what's a podcast? And some of the marketing of the magazine is a little more old school, a little more traditional, and they were just kind of like, you can have it, do what you want to. So I didn't want to call it the same thing, but so I write for creative screenwriting. I called it Creative Principles, but we would turn down like an actor. We only talk to screenwriters. So that kind of led me to talking to actors and directors and musicians and chefs and whoever I can kind of, mold into a creativity type mindset. So
Yeah.
now I kind of use it for whatever interests me, and it definitely helps me in my own writing. And I'm sure, as you know, you get to talk to great writers and just ask them whatever you're thinking about that week, in addition to a little bit of promotion.
Yeah, I've mentioned it many times on the show that there's a large aspect of doing the show that's pretty selfish, because I get so much energy out of talking to people about writing, and then I'm like super pumped to get back to it after I record an episode. And so when you're in LA working as a PA, and are you out there writing scripts for, you said TV shows with murder reenactments, but are you out there writing screenplays? What are you working on while you're out there?
At the time, I wrote a script in college, like the loose idea. It's like this 19-year-old pickpocket travels around to different universities and poses as a student. You can take somebody's wallet, you can get into all the buildings. It was kind of a reflection on like, you don't really need college, but you need this part of college. So that kind of got floated around. Someone I actually talked to now produces Ted Lasso. So I did make some relationships that way. That one kind of, I feel like my writing changed a lot over the years, but I moved into copywriting, did a lot of stuff in that. That's like definitely what paid the bills. But now I'm kind of coming back to it. I've always been talking to screenwriters. We're actually making my first film now. It's a documentary called Daredevil Society. It's about the history of stunts in film. So it's going to be an 8-hour series going back from Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, to Jackie Chan, Zoe Bell, all the way to today, to Keanu Reeves, and then the flow of that. So it's going to be a mini, like a 8-hour series. And then I'm also got some scripts more in that vein. I kind of write more. If I used to write like Ocean's 11, now I write more like Taylor Sheridan, Yellowstone. That's kind of where I found my sweet spot. So we're floating a script around now. It's a TV show, and I've got another one I'm writing that's got a little bit of interest to it as well.
It's funny. I saw, as I was preparing for this, I was like scrolling through your shows, because I'm like, oh my God, this is a lot of shows. And so there's names like leaping out at me, and Scott Adkins was one of the names that leapt out. And because my friends and I were, we love action movies, but we also love the stunt aspect of everything that's going into it. And Scott Adkins is one of those names that I think with modern stunts and the conversation around stunts. So I'm excited to see that Daredevil Society. Is that what Daredevil Society?
Yeah, Daredevil Society. Yeah, so it's been cool getting those stories. Like probably the first movie I saw as a kid, there was an action movie. Probably the first R-rated movie I saw. It's like Rumble in the Bronx, a Jackie Chan movie. So I just got to talk to one of the guys he's beating up in the movie over and over. I got to talk to that guy about what that was like. He was later one of the Ninja Turtles. He was in a Chuck Norris movie, and like all these wild stories. They've all got crazy stories. I just talked to another woman named Cheryl Lewis. She's an expert in getting hit by cars. So it's like the weirdest stories you can imagine, and then just kind of putting those in a flow. Like I like to kind of pitch it as like a less boring Ken Burns style documentary. There's a lot of stuff kind of happening in it and everything.
What a great thing to be able to tell people. What do you do? I get hit by cars.
Yeah, just really good at it.
Yeah, I'm great at getting hit by cars. So did you write that whole 8 hours? Like, is there a script for all 8 hours? How does something like that come together? I'm so interested in that.
Yeah, we're working on it now. I saw some courses and stuff too. So I'm thinking about like kind of documenting how I make this, because I think the making of it is as interesting as like what it is. So I interviewed a couple people on the show, and again, like kind of piquing my own interest. Like, so Val Gwynn directed a movie called Like Water a few years ago, the Bruce Lee documentary.
Yeah, Bruce Lee.
There was another one about John Belushi at that same time period by a guy named R.J. Cutler. And I'm watching these movies and I'm realizing they're not using talking heads. They're not cutting away to someone talking. They're doing it for creative reasons. Like, he didn't want to go from talking about Bruce Lee in 1975 to show like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar today, and he's 80 years old. It would kind of take you out creatively. But I was thinking about it like logistically. Okay, if I just do interviews over Zoom, like Ethan Hawke did a documentary like this too about Paul Newman recently. Don't show the clips. Don't show the talking heads. Just show archival footage. You go from like a $500,000 movie to maybe 50 grand because you're paying copyright lawyers to approve all archival footage and all that kind of stuff. So
right.
I'm like, how can one person basically make a movie by themselves in an office? And I kind of think you can. So I just started setting up, luckily the Scott Adkins interview was already booked, but I can use some of these credibilities of the podcast and ask
Yeah.
them, again, like whatever I want to. And you also, like, if I'm using that, I don't necessarily have to sit down with Tom Cruise. If Tom Cruise is talking about Mission Impossible anywhere, and I'm using that over some footage that's there, and it's all part of the bigger puzzle, that's kind of a way that, like, someone who doesn't really have that credibility can kind of start to break in and truly just like, it's just like putting time into something.
That's an interview or a documentary recently that I really loved was Chasing the Moon, which is about the Apollo moon landings, and it's zero talking heads.
Yeah.
There's not a talking head in it. It's all archival footage. There is narration and stuff, and it was artistically, I was very, very into it. And from a writing standpoint, it's super interesting too, because those interviews, it's a little, my guess is it's a little easier to edit if you don't have to like try and guide a conversation.
That's the big thing. That's why if you watch them and there's two cameras, you see them constantly cutting. It's because people do not talk in complete sentences. It's like impossible. So I can, you don't want to manipulate what they're saying, but you can just make it flow for the listener. So like as an example, I've got the first episode I'm going to give away for free in July, and it'll be like about silent films. So in terms of like writing, I'm writing about 10 or 15 minutes of it. It's kind of an opening that leads in, talks about vaudeville. And I'm trying my best, and I'm kind of going back and forth, but like I've interviewed experts. So like I'll talk to like Harold Lloyd's biographer, Buster Keaton's biographer. They'll tell me everything I really need to know. And I'm summarizing that down to like a chunk. And then I'm kind of like changing it that way. I'm doing the first, like what's called a scratch narration myself. Ideally, I'll bring on some producers later or some talent that would do a later version of that. But I've raised about almost $20,000 to kind of help me get started with it. So I feel like we're very much the foundation is there. And after doing all these interviews, that seems to be the difference. Is like people don't want to say, hey, I've got an idea or whatever. They want to be approached in a way that's like, I'm doing this. I'm taking this idea across the finish line. Here's how. I'd love for you to be a part of it. But if you're not, it's okay. I'm going to keep going. That seems to be like the best advice I've heard about making movies, writing books, like whatever you want to do. You can almost do anything today, especially if you're just that type of person who's just going to cross the finish line with it.
That's super interesting. I haven't really thought about that. And as someone who, like, I've pitched comics and novels and short stories and stuff, and that concept of, listen, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Whether you're going to like help me or not, like this thing's going to get done.
Right.
That's such an interesting aspect. You've heard that from a ton of writers that you've talked to?
More and more. Like it's like more and more common, especially today. I mean, we talked to Christopher McQuarrie that does the Mission Impossible films. I don't think he said it then, but I've heard him say it elsewhere. It's just like, you've never made it. Like you're never, like he's saying this. He does all Tom Cruise's movies.
Right.
And he's like, you've never made it. Like just assume like, I mean, it's odd to think of like Chris McQuarrie and like Christopher Nolan as like independent filmmakers, but they very much are. They're very much going to make these things happen, like almost regardless of what you tell them. They don't believe in permission. They don't believe in gatekeepers. They're just like, we're going to figure this out and make it work. It's very entrepreneurial spirited, I think.
Yeah. And in your book, Ink by the Barrel, I was reading, preparing for this. There's a lot of stuff about taking control of what you're working on. And one of the things, if you go to the website, which I'll link to and everything, because you're also giving it away for free, which I want to talk about. But it's an easy and proven way to become prolific is the thing that the tagline for the book. And I want to talk about being prolific and what that means to you, because you sort of talk about it in the book a little bit about, special cases or exceptions. But for me, since my show is like specifically about writing, the idea of what prolific means to me might be different than it is to you. Or I'm just so curious where other people fall on that spectrum of what does prolific mean?
Yeah.
What's it mean to you specifically?
I think it's like however you get to the point where, like, to kind of mini quote Seth Godin, like you're shipping regularly, like whatever that means to you, you're publishing and everything else. Like I listened to your interview with Daniel Kraus, kind of preparing for the show, and that dude sounds like another level. Like he's talking like 8 hours a day writing fiction. That's beyond what anyone can really normally do, right?
I sort of battled myself mentally after recording that episode because I was like, am I fucking up? Am I not doing enough? Like, what am I doing?
Yeah. Yeah. But he's like, if you watch a David Goggins video and you go run, you're not going to run like the way David Goggins, it's just very different. It's like
Right.
he's got some anxiety probably around it. Like he has to literally do it. I'm very much of like the idea of like creating every day, not necessarily like I edit videos. I look at some form of that as like creating every day. When I'm writing a book or different things like that, I'm usually doing more of a sprint. I'll spend a lot of time outlining, think about things. My big picture goal is to like personally for myself, I write 2 scripts a year and I want to write a book every 2 years. There's a lot of outlining and thinking and all the parts where you see Don Draper laying on the couch thinking. I feel like a lot of it's that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it's just that stuff. So, but at the same time, like I recently did this like prolific challenge to kind of pair with the book. Like 1,000 people signed up for it. Just a little free thing I did. And I wrote the book very much for myself like 10 years ago when I just like, I couldn't make it a habit. I couldn't just stick with it, and I think it's just like, if you've never done it, my goal for those people was to like be prolific, meaning like spend 30 days writing, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. So I made like a little video of me giving a lesson from the book. I would show a clip of an interview of someone like Joseph Gordon-Levitt or Judd Apatow that I've interviewed, like talking about some lesson. And it's just a 30-day video series. A lot of people finished it and never have done that before. They've never finished anything. And they all kind of felt like, day 31, they're like, now what? So I think like you really need to figure out what that is for you. And I like the idea of like having some big picture goals that I want to do over the course of a year, but I don't know, there's certain things, I don't know if you can really write every day. And I talk in the book about like playful trickster and tortured martyr. This whole idea from Elizabeth Gilbert. I think it's really your mental state, so like I used to go through and if I gave myself like a to-do list of 10 items every day, I would just be like mentally battling myself every day. But if I write down like 3 essential things, if you do 3 things a day, I work every day on something. You can only do 90 things in a month. And that also gives you like a cap too. Like you're welcome to do more, but you're not required to do more. And I think it's more about like how you approach it. Like really that's what prolific is. There's a giant difference in like George R. R. Martin and Stephen King. Stephen King just fucking loves it, right? He just loves it, eats it up. George R. R. Martin kills himself like over and over again. So wherever you are kind of in that spectrum, I think it's like prolific doesn't just mean, like I think when I was early in my career, I was like, I wrote 10,000 words today and I'm burnt out for 2 weeks, So prolific just means like there's a balance of like producing and resting and finding out what that means to you. But having those big picture goals kind of pulls me in that direction pretty often.
It's a big topic that we return to again and again on the show because in my very first interview, I was talking with Erica Swiler about writing every day and whether she does it. And I can't remember her exact answer, but the summation is like, hell no. No, I don't write every day. Yeah. And it's something that I've struggled with, and bless Kraus. Like Daniel Kraus is on, like you said, on another level. He has a drive that is admirable and a thing that I aspire to, but I also know mentally and emotionally, I'm a little more fragile than I need those downtimes. And you kind of already answered this, but towards the end of the book, the thing you said that stuck with me was the act of motion day in and day out is what makes you a writer. And as kind of bullshit as it sounds, that doesn't always mean writing.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to accept that sometimes. This will be the probably bajillionth time I've talked about it because it's such a sticking point with me. Like it doesn't always have to be writing. Like you said, you'll edit videos or you'll sit and think, and that is feeding back into the thing that you'll be doing eventually.
I think like the very minimalist approach is like one thing I try to do every day. And we're traveling right now, so I'm at the beach. It's not like a normal office. So I'm trying to like do certain things that are like kind of transportable. Is I'll write kind of a note card every day. I use like Ron Holiday's note card system to write books. So at the end of the year, and I've got way more than 365. Some days you write 10, some days you just write 1. But that like going back to like James Clear, that 2-minute habit, that makes you a writer. Like really that's enough. I think being so hard on yourself today, and it's a little bit less obvious. Like there's some quote from David Sedaris about like you could have a really shitty day writing, but on a typewriter, you got balls of paper on the floor. Like there's proof that you spent the time doing it. And on the computer, when you close your laptop, it's just like, it's nothing there, right? So like, I literally use note cards. I use bulletin boards. I'll go walk and think about something. And some of it's just kind of inching along. It's hard to say what's what. So going back to that challenge I did, if I'm talking to somebody who's brand new, who's never done, 30 days in a row, I would tell them, like, don't focus on word count. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Like, think about time. Like, are you just sitting at the computer doing nothing? And there's a Neil Gaiman quote in his master class. I think it was in his master class where he says something like, you can sit at your computer and you can write or you can do nothing, but you can't do anything else. And it's really like that simple. Like, if you just like make that habit every day and it's 5 or 10 minutes, like, it can barely be anything. You're just like staring at a blank page or a notebook or whatever. Like, you're one step closer to being a writer. And the more things you start to write, the more credibility and proof you have that that's who you are. Because you're not just like trying to publish your first book. You're not going to be the next J.D. Salinger. You're not going to be the next Tarantino. Get that out of your head.
Yeah.
But if you want to be a writer, it's just like do those things that a writer does, and that's kind of enough. That's enough to get started.
A big thing in your book is the idea of being a prolific professional, of thinking about writing from the standpoint of doing it professionally.
Yeah.
And just coincidentally, I had read an article in Esquire by a writer named Rainsford Stauffer about writing and whether it's a hobby or a career. Mm-hmm. I think the title is literally, "Is my writing a hobby or a career?"
Yeah.
And almost in like the first two sentences, I think it's literally the first two sentences, she says, "No, but kind of."
Yeah.
That's one thing I want to talk to you about, is where the line between hobby and profession is, and does it shift, and how important is it for us to define the thing we're doing as professional? Because I know I know why that distinction exists, because if I'm sitting down to write something and I'm just like, I'm just going to have fun, it's for nothing. My mindset's a little different than if I'm like, okay, shit, I've got a deadline. This thing is, where's that divide for you, or does it exist at all anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in the muse. I don't really believe in that. I kind of talk about like what I think it means. Like, if you're in the environment and the quote muse comes, it's because you're always there and you're kind of always ready. I think a friend of mine asked me something like this not long ago, and the difference in a professional and an amateur is that you do it when you don't want to do it. I mean, I think it's like that obvious. It's like, think about going to the gym. I don't have motivation most days to go to the gym. I don't ever really want to go,
right.
But it's like, that's how I kind of define part of myself, these certain things. Right. So I think that's the biggest difference. And also, like, kind of, you and I are people who dissect this kind of shit all the time. So all we're really thinking about is like habits and writing and everything else. So I think if you're in the mindset and you love it and you just love it and you produce pages every day and you're churning stuff out, you're not listening to people like us talk about writing, right? So
what a great point.
Right, like, what percent of those people are? I feel like there's so few. I've never met them, and I've talked to 400 or 500 writers in Hollywood.
Yeah, most of the people I talk to are like, no, yes, I hate it. Like, there are days when I hate it. I don't think it's so common.
Yeah.
That it makes me wonder if the people who don't hate it, not that like it's like something that I can't, it would be like if I'm bald as well. Like if I woke up one day and was like, you know what, I want to have hair today. Like it's not a thing that I can decide on. Like, I am a person who sometimes hates writing, and I'm a person who sometimes loves it. I can't change that.
I don't think I hate it. A lot of times, maybe you're writing the wrong thing. I think like one distinction I kind of make in the book is like people who can't seem to get the words out. They can't separate the internal writer from the internal editor. I think that's like a giant thing for people. Or you're writing the wrong stuff. Like, I mean, I've noticed this more as like, I'm a copywriter. I write for people like professionally. Like, I had 3 interviews the other day. And like the first 2, I was like, these don't really feel great. The third one like felt perfect, and we connected. We had similar mindset about what we're going to be working on. And I think it's just like you spend too much time doing something that's not really important, or it's not like your larger life purpose. Like, I write very specific types of movies, but it took me 4 or 5 bad scripts or so to figure out what that is. So it may just be that you haven't gotten through all that kind of drudge yet to get to it.
I wish that's what it was, but no, I've been writing. Yeah. Well, no, it's weird to say. Like, I think it does boil down to the thing that you said about doing it when you don't want to.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it feels like torture.
Yeah.
And I think on those days, those are the days where I tend to be like, you know what, I'm just going to do notes today, or I'm going to outline, or because I'm also a copywriter in marketing. And I definitely know what it feels like to write marketing copywriting versus the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's like career transitions too, right? I don't just mean like the obvious stuff. Like if I'm thinking about being prolific, I'm thinking about longevity. So I used to write a lot of blog content, and I've kind of shifted over to like helping people define their brands and stuff like that. You couldn't pay me enough to go back and write a ton of blogs every day. Like I just don't care about it, right? I care about this other thing. And I think there is some progression towards that. And I worked at ClickFunnels for a while, so I got to learn like some of the best marketing stuff from some of the best minds in the business, and it really changed my perspective on a lot of things. But yeah, it's hard to imagine going backwards or kind of getting stuck in one rut or something like that, you know?
But it is interesting to think about, well, how do you shift your brain? Because in January, before I got laid off, it got to a point where the notes that we were getting were so specific and so restrictive that it was awful.
Right.
And having to use the muscle that I have to be creative in this like tiny little dot, that felt worse than any time I've ever sat down on and tried to write a thing for myself that I was like, okay, I'm gonna work on this story. Yeah. Those two pains are completely different.
There's definitely like something about like a newness. Like I just finished up some work with this client. I was with him for like a year and a half, and they were starting to go in this really new, like innovative way, and it was really exciting. And then for some reason, I think you probably worked with companies where you go from like a startup to like a little beyond a startup, and you get a little more conservative. And I was like, oh, this feels terrible. And there's a feeling, like you know what it is, but it's a steady job. It's a cushy job. They pay you a bunch of money, you know? And I think just like, you got to get, like I'm teaching a course right now about like how to make money on Upwork and how to get started on all that stuff, freelancing. It's wild, like working with people who are just scared to make that first jump. So I do like the idea of talking to people who are a little bit behind you, talking to people that are a little bit ahead of you. But I think you just constantly, like, whenever you feel that, and nobody really talks about like feelings and related to work. And I'm the same way. I'm like, it's a discipline. You sit down and do it, but you know when it doesn't feel right, or when it's getting boring or stale, and when you can just go do something like completely new and like take a chance again. And I don't know, it's hard, especially in copywriting, where it's very much like paying your bills and this and that, you know. But I think like, you know what you got to do, you know, it's just like, are you willing to do it? I think that's true for like everything.
Yeah. And I think putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
With something creative. And I know I definitely struggled with this growing up when I was younger, that the idea that there is an aspect of creativity that is drudgery. Like there is an aspect of repetition, and you have to be comfortable with it.
Yeah. And it's hard to judge yourself of like the slogginess to like, oh, when it's done though, that's like a 10. Like I know what that feels like. But there's somewhere within the middle of all that where you're just like, you know, even like getting it done or finished is still like, you're only relieved that it's done. You're not proud of it. You don't really care about it. And that's usually when you're like, I need to go find something else. I mean, like I've done that for years, you know, it's just like, oh, this is like really boring. You just find yourself not excited about it. And how many ways can you say the same thing about a company or about a person, or, you know, when it's like repetition, you see it everywhere. You see it on your favorite shows when they go downhill, or a creator you like is not taking any more chances. I love seeing people just like crash and burn. Like Will Ferrell made that movie Casa de Mi Padre that was all in Spanish. Why would you do that movie?
Oh, but, yeah, no, it's a bad idea.
Bad idea. But I'm like, he's taking chances.
Swinging
that's
big.
Great. That's swing big, you know?
Yeah, I like that too. And it's so weird because you're the first copywriter I've talked to, or at least anyone that I've talked to about copywriting and how it fits alongside writing creative stuff. And because I know my goals if I'm writing a short story, or if I'm writing a novel or a screenplay or whatever I'm working on at the time, having someone else be the person who sets those goals and having them be so nakedly capitalistic that's kind of more the struggle for me. Like the torture that I feel like if I'm working on a piece of my own where I just feel like I can't find the right word, or I'm a lot better at it now than I was when I was younger, because now it is easier for me to be like, I just need to sit down and write. Like the anxiety or the worry that I'm feeling right now, I'm going to forget that if I'm just writing for at least 5 minutes. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a complete anxious head case mess. I think I probably am really, but that's okay.
I would almost say like a first step for me is when I'm writing with a client and it feels like it's getting a little bit stale, is when I don't have any new ideas for them. Like, so this last client I was with, like I was constantly pitching stuff. Some things would hit, some things wouldn't, but every now and then we'd all get excited about something. And as soon as like that started to kind of make a shift and turn, I was just like, oh, this is not where I am, you know? And it sucks, especially because in freelancing, like a lot of times you're just like, oh, my loyalty is not going to pay off at the end of this. You can kind of start to see that. But I think it's like, that's when you have to have faith in yourself and that you can just go and kind of find new work and like trust in your credibility. And I don't know, it's like you'll find something that really does interest you. Like sometimes it's just like a number of at-bats. Like I'm applying to a bunch of jobs right now. I'm kind of rebuilding like my portfolio and everything. And every now and then I'm like, oh shit, this is it, or something like that. It really stands out to me. And I don't know, it's like you have to kind of start to see what that is. Like it's just like it's there if you're just kind of looking for it.
See, for me, because I'm doing the same thing, I've applied to an asinine amount of jobs since I got laid off in January. And there are like, obviously I don't actually hate writing because I do it all the time and it's a huge part of my life. But that the fear and the anxiety that I feel, like the battle, the back and forth, when I'm podcasting like this right here, this is when I feel like I'm soaring. This is when I feel like I'm doing the thing that I was supposed to figure out that I had to do. Writing is part of that, but it's this other, like almost like this other beast attached to the side of it. Like,
it's harder, solitary. There's a lot. There's a lot to it.
Oh yeah, no, it's a big battle. This will actually be the first time I've asked anyone about this, and we'll move on from it. Who knows how quickly?
Sure.
Chat GPT.
Yeah.
First time it's gotten mentioned on the show that I can remember. From my standpoint, as someone who has worked in marketing for close to 10 years and has recently been laid off right as ChatGPT was like, oh, what are your thoughts about it? Because I know mine.
I'm a little all over the place with it. I recently went on a show and they asked me a ton of questions about it. At the end of the show, he said I was the first person to not give a negative viewpoint about it. So I kind of have a couple of opinions about it. So like for really basic stuff, like my buddy's girlfriend was applying to a job and I was like, here's how you write a cover letter in like 2 minutes. Like there's no reason to spend a lot of time thinking about something like that where no one really gives a shit anyway. Personally, like there's a writer's strike right now. So my screenwriting interviews have basically ended for the last like 6 weeks or so. And it's longer than usual. And it was initially around streaming, but now it's about AI and complications of that. I look at it like kind of having a dumb intern or someone you're talking to, right? So it's like I'm writing a book with this guy right now. And I was like, look, I'm going to use ChatGPT and we're going to figure out the scaffolding of this book. Like, cause I can throw 5 or 10 ideas into it. It's going to give me those back. And we're going to tear that apart and dissect and just kind of have a framework to go upon. And then I'm very much like taking his personal stories and putting them into that book and making it better. I'm not actually using ChatGPT for the writing process because it's not a good writer. It's a pretty shitty writer, but it's a good idea, spitball type thing. If you like hate the blank page, you just want something to get going. But it is replacing some pretty generic stuff, some ad writing, some outline phases, a lot of the like first drafts of things. But it's weird because I'm just now kind of looking back at Upwork and like the phrase prompt engineer, to my knowledge, didn't exist like 6 weeks ago. And now it's like every third job is like, I need a prompt engineer to update all my stuff or whatever.
Yep.
But I look at it kind of a dummy you're talking to who knows a lot about something weird, and you have to really kind of align them with what that is. I don't necessarily think people are losing their jobs to AI, but they may be losing their jobs to people who can use AI better than they can. So I do think we need to understand it to some degree. It is going to get you past some of that hurdle stuff, but the writing is still the writing. It's still like all the hard parts are still there. Like that part's not changing. And the problem with the studios and the streaming is like the studios are like, well, it's good enough. It's good enough to write another version of ER or whatever it is because it's all the procedural stuff. And every film or TV show that like changes the zeitgeist, there's some personal connection to people. So like this form of like massive plagiarism is not going to do that. So there's a time and a place for it. But I do think writers should at least be looking into it. And I am worried a little bit about like, if I was in ninth grade right now, would I be using it to write boring papers? It's hard to say I wouldn't be, So is there going to be more writers in the future? Are they going to be any good? That's a big question, I think.
I agree with almost all that. Yeah. My big fear coming from the place where I came from, where it was like, well, yeah, just get ChatGPT to write that. I'm like, right, but you guys pay me to do the thing that you want me to have it do. And I got laid off, which sort of seemed like it was hard for me to not at least see some correlation.
Yeah.
But
like, am I creating a SOP for an AI system to take my job, basically?
Yeah, it's just so weird to think, and I wrote about this a little bit online, that a marketing agency specifically would be like, hey, you need to hire experts, and that's us.
Yeah.
But we're going to use ChatGPT, and like, why pay a marketing place to do that? That seemed weird to me. But I think the biggest fear that I have is that like ChatGPT does exist in a way that can be utilized to do some of those like slower things or the more boring things that you can streamline. But what I'm scared of are this might sound mean, but like the idiots, because like chainsaws are not made to cut hands off, but the idiots are out there and that's what they end up becoming. And like Amazon's being flooded with AI written garbage. And that's the thing that I'm afraid of. Like you said, what are the writers look like in the future?
That's the Elon Musk fear, I feel like, too. Like I heard Tim Ferriss talk about like, I wonder if in the future there's going to be books that say written by a human on them as opposed to like written by AI. I think like right now, it's hard to say where we're going to be at in like 10 or 20 years. But like right now, it's like what's getting replaced is like what, even like I've got my writing partner, we write horror movies together. He's a coder. He's using ChatGPT for stuff that he just like has forgotten how to do, and it like fills in the blanks. I think for both of us, copywriting and coding and everything else, it'll be like what used to maybe take 5 people is like one guy in AI or one woman in AI. I do think that's very real, but it's hard to say like where it's going. I would just like encourage people to like don't be fearful of it as far as like a tool, but you still need to know your stuff. You need to be really, really good at your profession, I think.
Yeah, I mean, using ChatGPT to help you streamline a summary or something like that is different than having like ChatGPT. It's not going to do great with metaphors about existentialism or those kind of things. How, like when you're writing a book like Ink by the Barrel or the other stuff that you're working on, how long does a book like that take you? And because Ink by the Barrel there's a lot of quotes in it, a lot of sources that you're quoting and linking together the themes that you're talking about in each chapter and the overall idea of becoming prolific and thinking about writing as a professional career. How long does something like that take you to put together?
So I use like Ryan Holiday's note card system is like kind of where the idea comes from. I just throw everything on note cards, put them in a pile, start to form those and connect ideas on your own. If I'm like reading for, 8 months to 2 years, then I can write the whole thing in like 60 days or less. I think there's some other stuff there too. Like there's like, I've been a ghostwriter. I've written like 10 books for other people. I've been in those meetings where they clearly don't even care what the guy's book's about. It's got a gigantic audience, and I've pitched my own books where I've gotten closer, but I don't have the audience. So I'm really just starting to kind of promote myself and, step out from behind the shadows to some degree. But I think there was some like confidence there too. It was like, I need to, like I call it borrowed authority. Like I need to rely on all these other experts, like all the people I've interviewed, all the books I've read. And I just now have kind of started to like, well, I know my stuff too. And it is because of all that, accumulation of reading everything and everything else. But I do think there's like a confidence thing there that I'm seeing shift away from already. I'm working on another book now and I'm kind of stepping away from that. But I definitely think it like helps you like quickly outline the process, understand what your thoughts are, and like get the words on the page and really just like refine the idea. So like Ink by the Barrel for me is just like, secrets from prolific writers, how to be prolific. Some of the ideas might even kind of fight each other. But I've talked to so many people in so many different ways. I want you to find the idea that works for you, that makes you able to sit down and not completely dread what you're about to do with the page, right?
That is the dream, isn't it? At least
Right,
for me.
right.
So are they always physical note cards, or do you ever use digital?
I always use physical. Whenever I go digital, like doesn't work. Like even like my to-do list, I've recently I told you like about 90 things. I'll print out a paper with 40 or 50 things on it, and that's what like I'm promising I'll get done the next month. And I've got like 40 or 50 blank spots, and I know like, okay, you can really only do this many things. But I'm very like physical, sticky notes, note cards, bulletin boards, stuff like that.
I've dabbled with that a little bit, but I use Scrivener a lot, and I use Final Draft to write screenplays. I used Scrivener for a while, but I like Final Draft more.
Yeah.
As far I didn't know you were a ghostwriter. I have many more questions now.
Yeah.
Because my experience with ghostwriting, I'm very interested in the form, and I only know of like super well known ghostwriters who like J.R. Moehringer, like Agassi's book, and obviously the Harry crazy that thing. But what's it like? Do you get to sit down with your subject and talk for hours, or?
It's like totally different. And I'm like, I've come at it so many different ways. So probably the first ones I got were like, somebody paid me like $2,500. And these are people that write books. Like they write a book instead of a business card. They were going to write one book in their life, and it's about being a CEO or something like that. So I've written a bunch of those. I've written books like How to Start a Food Truck Company. Those are like simple things. More recently, I've started writing books with like kind of more well-known people. Like one I wrote in the last like 6 months hit like number 2 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. This person I was working with was just so busy. I literally like just watched the course he made, and we had 3 phone calls, and I had to write the whole book. Now, if it's up to me, I'll at least have basically interview them like my podcast for an hour once a week. And then some of them want to kind of write themselves. Some of them hate writing. So it's really a variety of like the type of person it is and what they're open to. And the one I'm working on now, the guy is like, he kind of wants to, it'll be ideally something like his name with Brock Swinson. So like more like along those lines, because he wants to be more open about it. So all these things are like up to the person. I don't really care. A lot of people ask me like, are you jealous of the book? I'm like, I don't really give a shit. It's not books I would write anyway,
Right.
So I've got my own books I want to write. So it's just like some things they're paying the bills, but if you're going to write a book with somebody, you do need to care about what it is. And I am probably crafting it in some way that's not unlike the book I published, where I'm thinking a lot about longevity and creativity and productivity. And some of those things are just like, they're going to find their way into everything that I write, basically.
That's such a funny question. Are you jealous of the success?
Right.
Like, this isn't my story.
Yeah. They're like, do you get residuals? I was like, no, but it's like, I get a big paycheck, and then I don't really give a shit. I don't think about it again. The funny, way back before, because you see these like shifts. I've only written 2 fiction books that are both ghostwriting jobs. I wrote one that was a Western fiction. I really liked it, and they put a pen name on it. I wrote one I didn't like. It was kind of like a 50 Shades of Grey type book. I'm like, we want to use your name for this one. I was like, oh shit. So there's like a dirty rom-com floating around Canada with my name on it right now.
Amazing. That's awesome.
Right. You feel weird, like, because you have to research it knowing nothing about the whole genre. It's just like, this is odd,
Well, the weird things like on Amazon, obviously romance is a massive genre, and Westerns and action books are massive. And that's where some of the AI stuff is trickling about, falling into. But when you sit down to write your own stuff, what are you naturally drawn toward? Genre? What type are you sitting down to write a script? Like, what's the thing that if you sit down, what's the first thing you're going to be working on?
So I've written a couple horror movies with a partner. I've written 3 or 4 scripts on my own. Like, no matter where we start, we always end up talking about like the same 10 movies. We talk about the first season of True Detective over and over and over. movies like Drive, most of Taylor Sheridan stuff. And I've been fortunate enough, like I've actually interviewed Taylor Sheridan and Paul Schrader, who probably influenced me the most. So if you think about like underdog anti-heroes heading towards a violent catharsis, like that's how I think of like everything I write, there's something like that in it, like almost like inevitably. So I kind of just lean into it now. Like I used to, I don't know, I'd go back and forth or whatever I saw that week. Oh, here's Aaron Sorkin or something like that. But I'm like, nah, just like, this is what I like. There's some quote in True Detective where he's like, the world needs bad men to keep other bad men away from the door. I'm like, that's everybody I've ever written, at least like the protagonist, So then you write the juxtaposition of that and the way you pick a genre and it kind of just lays itself out. And it's super fun. I'm working with a coach now who's kind of helping me do some more clarity and like, ideally once the documentary sells, I'll have 2 screenplays that are kind of in line with that. And we're going to be working on selling those as well.
That's a genre that I love Paul Schrader.
Yeah.
Weirdly have been I found there's a book that has what is it, Taxi Driver, American Gigolo, and Light Sleeper. It has the screenplays all in the same book, and I've been reading those relatively recently. So that's definitely a genre subgenre that I appreciate.
And he can't help himself. He writes about a troubled guy writing in a journal. It's every movie he's
literally every single movie. When I watched Rolling Thunder, I was like, this sort of just seems like Taxi Driver. And I still love it.
First Reformed, and I hadn't seen Master Gardener, but I guarantee it's got.
Oh no, there's in the trailer you see him in the journal. Right. It's right there. Yeah. I'm excited for it. And do you read a lot of like? Obviously you do the show and you write blogs and stuff. So are you constantly reading other people's stuff with an eye towards finding inspiration or energy, or are you constantly seeking that stuff out, or is it just every now and then kind of thing?
It's probably every now and then, or more like problem solving, like how do you do this in the best way, or like how do you kind of show this on screen. And I'll end up like I might spend when I started my documentary, I watched the first 10 minutes of every single thing Ken Burns had ever come out with. I'm like, how do you start a long form documentary like this? So stuff like that. Or I actually host a show for creative screenwriting now on YouTube for them. So I interviewed Edgar Wright probably a year ago, but we're doing an episode where we're talking about the first 5 pages of every Edgar Wright script. So stuff like that, I'll lean into something. I'll read them, watch them over and over. But it's weird. It's just like kind of talking to this coach again. It's like, there's millions of movies. In a lifetime, someone probably sees 5,000 movies. But who you are and who you write like, especially screenwriters, there's like 10 or 20 movies you're going to reference the rest of your life. You probably saw them when you're like a teenager or something, Like I don't see a lot of stuff today. I'm like, really blows me away. Like I'm talking about the same stuff that got me the first time, that made me want to write in the first place,
Oh yeah, for sure. I definitely have those that I return to a lot. And recently, literally last week, I was rewatching the beginning of Super 8. Because of how economical that very first scene is, where they're removing the numbers, saying when the last mistake in the place was, and reading the script and comparing it to the movie, I think is the same thing you were saying, is problem solving. Like because I'm working on a thing now and reading other screenplays to see like, okay, how they do this. Okay. And they did an insert shot here. They did this. Yeah. I love doing that stuff.
Yeah, then whenever you can talk to someone like third party, so like just talking to some other people, I'm like slowly realizing I'm solving too many problems before I start writing with the character. So I'm like, there's not a giant enough transformation. Like he's too smart on page 1 or something like that. So it's just every now and then you'll get some big epiphany like that. It's just like, oh shit, I've been doing this off the whole time, or something. But
yeah,
that's kind of the fun part there too. It's like, okay, well, I see the new way now. I see this new method, how to go about that,
Do you write on your phone?
A little bit. I probably write more on I do like to make things small though. If I'm looking at a blank page and I can move it over to my digital sticky notes and it's tiny, I do like that. But I'm more like jotting ideas for the phone and stuff.
I've talked to several people on the show where they're like, yeah, I wrote most of this on my phone, or I wrote it on my phone through coming up with ideas and stuff. And I mentioned it briefly in one of the more recent episodes where I deleted Twitter off my phone, and I had a gesture set up so that Twitter would pop up, and I put my notes app on that gesture now. So if I do it just like out of instinct,
That's
I'm
cool.
like, oh, okay, now it's time to write. I'll write something. Even on the screenplay that I'm working on, like the amount of stuff that I've gotten written on my phone and not worrying about formatting or anything, like just boom, 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 going through stuff. It's been a big help. I was kind of shocked by how much more I got done by just pouring it into the notes app on my phone.
Yeah, and some of that's just like taking that professional hat off for a second and like going back to it kind of being fun. You're right, because you get ideas when you're outside walking or something like that. You don't really get the ideas staring at the computer. I like to think of it as like, if I'm going to write every morning, I've got so many hours in which I'm going to be beneficial. But if I can show up with something, like with something in the notes app or wherever, that I'm not starting from scratch. So then you're not wasting that valuable time where you can enter flow state or whatever they want to call it. You got to show up kind of, you've already done your research, I think.
Yeah. So Ink by the Barrel, it's out now. You can actually go to brockswinson.com/ink. I think if you just type in brockswinson.com, it pops up, right?
Yeah. So I'm giving it away for free. It's the PDF download and the audio book. This is something I kind of learned working with people like Russell Brunson and Pace Morby, and really just kind of putting everything out there. Again, it's kind of that borrowed authority, but a lot of people just like have one idea and they're very careful of that idea and very precious about it. Like I see this as like the first of maybe 10 books that I plan to write in a lifetime if I'm writing every couple of years. And I really just want to build that trust and like encourage as many people as I can to be prolific. So that's kind of the thinking behind the marketing. And then we'll be coming out with some different courses and projects and all kinds of stuff soon. So anyone who signs up will kind of get the email list and access to the podcast. And I'm just going to keep giving a ton of great stuff away for free as well.
Creative Principles is the podcast that's out now. Episode 436 recently went up. So obviously recording very regularly. Are those all brand new episodes, or are you bringing stuff back from a library of stuff, or how's it work?
I've never done a repeat, I don't think. I mean, I've got 10 on my computer no one's heard yet. So I've published a lot, or like I listen to a lot. And I'll go through phases, like someone just asked me like kind of how I do it. I need to be more scheduled, like one a week or whatever it is, but I might record 30 in a month and then not record anything for 2 months. So it's all over the place. It's more like I've hired an assistant now to help me with some of the kind of boring stuff. So I might be in an airport and take a picture of 8 books. Like, hey, I want to talk to all these writers you can get me a hold of. And then we'll probably schedule half of those. So a lot of it's just stuff like that. Or I'll watch some new show. Like Lucky Hank just came out. I interviewed Paul Lieberstein, 2 of the writers. Paul Lieberstein was Toby on The Office, Muriel Enos, and Diedrich Bader. Just book. I love the show, so I want to talk to as many people as I can from that show. So I just like to kind of jump around what interests me, and then some of these obviously very beneficial. Like I'm thinking about the next book I want to write, so I'm picking people off of. They've got a reel that went viral, and I want to ask them some question about that. So it's definitely a variety of people that, obviously pique my own interest, but hopefully are beneficial for listeners as well.
Well, I know how much it takes to get ready for for episodes, so that's impressive. Because I mean, I record. I try to record around an hour at least.
I mean, I do like half an hour or so. I used to get paranoid. Like I had this job, and I actually recorded my interview with Aaron Sorkin in my car on my lunch break. And I used to kind of like have all my questions, and I would just read the questions, and I was barely listening to what they're saying. More often than not, though, like I'll watch the trailer for the movie, but then I'm just having a conversation. Like I'm assuming I know enough to have a conversation. And once in a while, like actually when I talk to Cary Fukunaga, I didn't really realize till right before it started that he's the one who directed True Detective, because he wasn't that famous at the time, and then after that he went on to do the James Bond movie. So there's every once in a while I'm like, oh shit, this is like a gigantic thing I can't not ask about, But you can usually I just kind of tighten that window that I'm prepping for things.
See, for me, I know that I can suffer from over prep. That I can get way too into my own head, and I have to battle that. But also, like you just said, there's been a lot of times where I've sat down to talk with someone, and it's basically 6 to 7 of the questions that I have written don't get asked because we just have a conversation. And, things flow. But it's an impressive amount of episodes up for Creative Principles. Is there anywhere else you want to send people to find your stuff? I know you've got stuff on. Is it creativescreenwriting.com?
Yeah, and you can read. So a lot of the interviews are also like the magazine basically buys them from me now. So they're also in print form. A lot of the bigger screenwriters. We talked to like Peter Gould recently, who did Better Call Saul. But then I'm also just on like Instagram and Twitter at Brock Swinson. That stuff's kind of new to me. I'm more concerned with like an email list, but I am kind of starting to share some reels and clips. But it really just cycles back to the podcast and the book and just like the idea of being prolific. So either at Brock Swinson or brockswinson.com for the majority of that stuff.
Heck yeah. Everybody go check out Ink by the Barrel and listen to Creative Principles. Brock, super awesome to talk to you. I'm glad you got to stop by.
Yeah, man, I feel like we covered a lot. I really appreciate it.
Ink by the Barrel is available right now at brockswinson.com/ink, and Creative Principles has a ton of content for you to listen to. Check it out on Apple Podcasts. Everywhere you can find a podcast, you can find it. And give it a listen. You'll find a lot to hear and help you with your writing. Thank you so much for checking the episode out. Again, if you like it, please go rate it, subscribe to it, share it, comment on it, all those things. It's posted everywhere. Most of the people, I can tell from my stats, are listening on Apple Podcasts, so thank you for doing that there. And swing by austinrwilson.com. That's my website where you can find my work. There's free stories, free comic books, all kinds of stuff. So go check that out. But there's also a bibliography that lists where I've had stuff published. And listen to the other episodes that I have up. There's definitely more coming this summer. I've got a lot of other people already scheduled and working on getting stuff out. And I have internet now, so it's going to be a lot easier to get the next episode out. I really, really appreciate Brock's patience and me getting this all put together while I moved and got the internet up and ready. So thank you to him, and thank you to you for listening. I'll catch you next time.